there, Banditos. Welcome to the latest episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits on this June 15th. I am Joe Marcello.
I'm Oren Phillips.
I'm Mike Farah.
And today we're talking to someone like us. And you must be thinking, well, he's another podcaster. No. He's a comic book fan who's had the chance to be probably one of the most groundbreaking figures in the comic book world as of late. He's one of the architects of ComiXology, an application that I have spent a ridiculous amount of time and even more ridiculous amount of money on. We're talking to John Roberts.
Yeah, I'm a old school kind of guy. I have still a whole bunch of long boxes and issues, but for me, it was really interesting to hear about this and all that went into creating ComiXology. And it certainly has an incredible fan base, and it's really changed the comics as we know it.
Yeah, John and I crossed paths at Marvel, and when he was brought on to do the dot comics, which were kind of an early progenitor of the digital comics revolution to come. And then after we had both left, he, struck out on his own and eventually found a co-founder for a new venture called ComiXology, and it became, the regular platform for digital comics. As Joe said, you could spend a lot of money there and a lot of time, and it's just so convenient. And it was interesting to hear how it all came together and, what it's all about, and all through, the Amazon takeover and everything. So we get into everything. So let's listen to it. This is John Roberts.
Today, we are pretty excited. We have a unique guest. We have someone who, dare I say, has changed comic book reading for most people out there. And God knows I have spent a ridiculous amount of money on his product. We're talking to John Roberts. He is the co-founder of ComiXology and former director of ComiXology Submit. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I have to say, I was pretty excited when we heard we're going to talk to you, because I genuinely love ComiXology. I don't have a close comic book shop, and when I discovered ComiXology, I was like, oh, cool, I don't have to leave my house. So, score.
Who wants to leave their house?
Yeah, I don't want.
Very overrated.
I just have to hit a button. My comics come to me. I'm going to ask you the first question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, how did you and when did you discover comics?
So my dad got into, so my dad read comics in college, and back before trades became ever present or ubiquitous, he had a bunch of trades. I actually have some. There's some up there, and so I have like Bring On the Bad Guys and The Marvelous Women of Marvel, Captain America, Sentinel of Liberty. I have one of my favorites is a Captain Marvel Shazam collection, which it was both black and white and color, and it had the best of the Captain Marvel stories. And he had these in his office, and I would just sneak in there when he wasn't around, and I would read these comics, and that's what really got me into it. And then I remember I'd only read his books. And then finally one day he's like, all right, we're going to go out and we're going to buy you a comic. And that's pretty much where it started.
That's awesome.
So before ComiXology, I'm going to take you back and all the way back to the Marvel days, which, by the way, full disclosure for everybody out there, John and I were at Marvel at the same time. I don't think our jobs really overlapped all that much, but we certainly ran in the same social circles, drank together, had a lot of fun.
League, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So when you came to Marvel, what was the position you were hired for? And was digital comics sort of part of the plan at the inception, or did that come later?
No, that was why I was hired. So I'd lived in Pennsylvania. I grew up in Pennsylvania. And then in 2000, I moved to New York. for a job in the tech industry, but this was like right as the bubble burst. So I got there. Within 3 months, I ended up getting laid off, but they gave me a nice severance. And so I was just kind of like hanging out. And a friend of mine called me up and he said, there's this guy I know at Marvel who's looking for someone like you. And I said, well, being someone like me, maybe I should talk to him. So I talked to him, and it was, I met with Bill Jemis. The goal was they wanted to do digital comics, and they wanted to do them in Flash, which was like my specialty at the time. I was like a top end Flash developer. So I met with them. I had loved comics growing up, so it was kind of a good fit. And so they hired me, and so that's how it was called .comics. It was all based on Flash. And we were getting like millions of views a month. I mean, it was just crazy how many people, and a lot of people were reading outside the US. I remember, I forget which country, it was Ultimate X-Men. I think they went to, maybe it was like Sweden or Finland. And the artist drew mountains. And we actually got email from someone from that country saying, there are no mountains in our country. But yeah, that's how I got started. Came in, basically set up the whole thing. Created, not only did I do an online reader, but I created this is before iTunes. I created a application that you could download to your computer that would allow you to download the comics and read them offline. I did that all in Macromedia, Flash, and Director, I think before Adobe bought them.
Wow.
Were these the first digital comics like ever, or were there some crude things before you arrived on the scene?
So there were Shockwave. I don't know if you remember Shockwave. It was Macromedia Shockwave. It was a precursor to Flash that allowed you to do a lot of stuff, but it was slower and clunkier. And so Marvel had done some comics that were specifically designed to be read in Shockwave. But they were expensive to produce, and no one really liked them. So they kind of they did a couple of those, and then they kind of just moved on. It wasn't, and then there were other companies that had done stuff like that. I remember someone was making comics in HyperCard. I don't know if you remember HyperCard. It's an old Apple application. It was like a precursor to PowerPoint and some other stuff. So people have been making digital comics for as long as, there have been computers. Digital Justice was a comic that was created on the computer, but then ended up printing Batman Digital Justice. I don't know if you remember that. So digital comics have been around for quite a while. Even me, I had a Tandy TSR-80 Radio Shack computer that the drive was actually a cassette tape. Like you actually recorded your programs onto a cassette tape. And I used to draw the Teen Titans using just a pixel, 8-bit pixel and editor. And then I would save them to my audio tape. But the .comics, I think, was the first time that we had really gotten, or Marvel had really gotten serious about it. We were taking comics that you could buy in the stores and making them available online and making them available for free.
What was the first digital comic in the form that we kind of are more familiar with today? Do you remember what that would have been?
So the very first comic that ComiXology did, item ID 1 or 1000, because I always started it. I didn't start at 1, I always started at 1000, was Atomic Robo from I'm going to butcher their names. Yes, so Atomic Robo was the very first product that we got. And then, so in the beginning, when we were looking to get comics onto ComiXology, we targeted the people that we loved. So my co-founder, David Steinberger, he reached out to Matt Wegener to get Mage onto the platform. I love Mike Allred, so we talked to him about getting Madman onto the platform. And then, yeah, Atomic Robo, Scott Wegener, and Brian Clevinger. They created this book that, I mean, God, it had to be like 14 years ago, maybe. And that was the very first series that we ever had. And they're still going. I mean, they're still creating stuff. They were printing through IDW, and they put together, actually, I have one right here. They did a Kickstarter, and they did a whole series of hardcovers.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, these are great. These are absolutely great.
That's really nice of them.
Yeah.
Was it a hard sell? You know, was it hard to convince comic book creators to like, hey, look, I got this crazy idea, you know, or I got this new idea. Forget those hard copies that you guys are so familiar with. Let's make it all digital. Were they in favor of that, or did you really have to sell them on it?
So this was back, I mean, the digital was basically new at this point. So what was it? It was 2007 is when the iPhone came out. And we had been pushing for, we had actually talked to publishers before that about doing digital comics, but we wanted to do them on the web because, you know, the iPhone hadn't come out yet. There was some hesitancy, there was some pushback because it's hard to protect the images on the web. But then once the iPhone came out, that's when people started getting interested. Now we did have some competitors that came out before us. They were doing single issue apps where it was like, you know, Atomic Robo #1 would be a 99-cent download that you would have to download, and then it would take up space on your home screen. And I don't know if you remember, but when the iPhone first came out, you were only allowed 30 apps on your home screen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
precious real estate.
Yes. So we didn't want to do that. We wanted to do something, we wanted to have one app where you could have all of your comics. So we waited, we had developed Guided View before that. And that's kind of how we got publishers on board. David would go to Comic-Con and he would basically show them a working prototype of Guided View and say, this could be your comic. And that's how we got a lot of people on board. And then once the iPhone came out and once they introduced in-app purchasing, we created the first version of ComiXology, and you could basically buy, I think we launched with 30 titles at the time, and then just slowly grew over time. And then we kept talking to Marvel. As Michael mentioned, I had an in at Marvel, so I kind of leveraged that. And Marvel was looking to get into digital comics, but they were basically licensing. They saw it as licensing at that point. And we said to them, we don't want to license. We want to be in business with you. And so we worked with them, and we actually ComiXology built the Marvel app. And that premiered. We debuted the Marvel app on the same day that the iPad was released. So when Apple was sending out iPads to reviewers to basically, show them what the iPad was for the very first time, one of the apps that they included as part of that preview was the Marvel app, which ComiXology had created. So when the iPad was released, it had us, it had Marvel. So you could read comics on a larger screen than just on your phone.
Yeah, that's what really did it for me. It was when I got an iPad and I was like, whoa, all right, this is cool. Because I don't I have read them on the computer, but, I do most of my comic book reading, mainly in bed, before I go to sleep, and that's how I read my comics and stuff. So it, especially on the big iPad, when I got that, I was like, this is amazing. Look how big this is. This is so cool. And my wife loves it. But
well, I'm sure what your wife doesn't miss are the long boxes full of comics.
Oh no, those are right here. But I will say, I have as many comics in my ComiXology account as I do right now in my boxes. And that just, I thought about it the other day. I'm looking at all the boxes. I got some here and I got a few over there, and I'm like, I got more right here now. It's bananas, man. But yeah, it's I don't think many people can talk to those who have quite literally changed their life, and I mean that in, the best possible way. You've changed the habits and lives of many people.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. And we actually, we got some amazing feedback when we first launched. There was one person who had written into us. They were going blind, and they loved comics, but they weren't able to read print comics anymore because their eyes just, weren't up to the challenge. And so, we introduced at the time, and when we launched, we allowed you to zoom in. So you could zoom in pretty much as far as you wanted to. And he said, between Guided View, do you guys, I should probably preface this. Are you guys familiar with Guided View? Should I share what Guided View is for the?
I mean, definitely do so.
I think you should share it. Anyway,
but I use both.
We're very, as both users of ComiXology, I would bet that we're both very familiar with Guided View.
So for the people who don't know what Guided View is, Guided View was a technology that ComiXology created that allowed you to basically take a guided tour around the comic book page. And we did this for a couple of reasons. One, it was cheaper. We had competitors who were basically chopping up the page into screen-sized chunks, and in some cases even redesigning it so that it would fit, which is labor intensive and not really scalable. So we thought, what's a better way to do that? Well, a better way to do that is to basically show you a little part of the screen at the time. And so we start up at the top left, and then we kind of just move you around from panel to panel. And a human being actually goes in and draws the boxes of like the XY coordinates and of where it is that you're going to be. And then we basically created a way for you to read with one hand on your iPhone. So like if you're on the subway, or if you're, holding your baby or whatever, you could read your comics with one hand, panel by panel, and we would allow you to zoom in. And so the page, that was the big difference. The page remained untouched. If you wanted to, you could read it in full page mode. You could zoom in, you could pan around, you could do whatever you want. But if all you wanted to do was read the story, you could go panel by panel. And then we would try to frame the panels in a way that would basically move the story along. And then if anything ended up getting cropped out, you could go back, you could zoom in, you could do whatever you want. And so we had people who were like, that allowed them to continue reading their comics. Another advantage of the digital comics is that we had a lot of servicemen, or I apologize, we had a lot of people in the military who were serving overseas in Iraq, Afghanistan, and they would save up their weekly internet bandwidth and use it to download comics to their devices so that they could read comics while they were in the field. We've had I had a woman reach out to me. Her daughter is autistic, and she really connected with comics. And so reading in ComiXology allowed her to, focus and really connect with the comics. We had a lot of people who had never been in a comic book store, but they found comics in college. And, Joe, just like you said, they didn't live near a comic book shop. So they were able to download the app and, read wherever they were.
Yeah. Yeah. It's It's great. I mean, like I said, there were two around our neck of the woods. They closed, and the one that is still around is kind of out of the way, so it's very inconvenient. And I found this. I'm like, dude, this is great.
Well,
And then when the selection grew, and it just like anything and everything was pretty much available, and the collected editions and everything was great.
yeah,
Guided view was certainly the differentiator, I'd say.
Yeah.
The main differentiator, and I'm sure really took you guys over the top, especially in those early days when you're, competing with other apps and just PDF. I mean, really, you're competing with PDF readers because people just chop them up into pages, and you can read them that style. But guided view was really the technology, the differentiating technology that made ComiXology special, especially in those early days.
Oh yeah.
I think a lot of this comes down to that David and I, and then there's Peter Jaffe, he's our third co-founder. He wasn't really much of a comic book reader. He was our numbers guy. But David and I loved comics. I mean, we read them as kids. We really had a fondness for the genre. And so we wanted to build something that we would use, right? Like, it wasn't just us being like, hey, let's create something so everyone in the world can read comics. It's like, well, I want to use this. I want to make sure that the app is usable so that I don't get frustrated. And if we ever found something that bugged us, we would go and we would fix it. And I think that made a huge difference because, we love the genre, we love the medium, we love, the creators, we love the fans. And, I think that showed in what we created.
Yeah, I think so. It didn't feel like it felt very organic to comic books as much as it could be when you're shifting formats so drastically. And I think that's different than what it would have been if it were cooked up by a investment firm or someone else that didn't have any background or passion for comic books itself. So I'm glad you guys got to it first before. I mean, it was something that probably was inevitable, that comic fans got to it first and made this tool that I think enhanced a lot of fans' lives, like you just enumerated.
And we also worked we saw our publishing partners as partners, right? So we worked with them to make sure that the experience wasn't just good for us, but it was good for them as well. We had some competitors that were dictating the way things had to be done, and we're like, well, we don't want to do that. We want our publishing partners to want to work with us, to collaborate with us, to come to us and say, we have this really good idea and we want to work with you on it. So we worked really, really hard to foster those relationships and try not to alienate anyone.
One question, I know, Mike, you have yours, but one, I just want to jump in. What was it like? You were creating Marvel's reading application, but then again, you have your own. So, I mean, what's that like for you guys? I mean, they have their own subscription service, but you're basically creating, their tool when you want people to come to yours.
So that's a fair question. But I mean, here's the thing. I think, as you intimated, Marvel was going to do it with or without us, right?
Yeah.
And at least with us, we had a partnership. And one of the things that came out of that partnership is that we basically had the ability to transfer purchases between the two apps. Now you're going to have people who are just Marvel fans. They're going to only buy comics in the Marvel app. They're only going to read comics in the Marvel app. But then you have some people who want to read more than just Marvel. And so what this allowed us to do was it allowed us to create a relationship between the two apps so that if you bought it in Marvel, you could read it in ComiXology and vice versa. And then what happened is that once we were able to start getting people from the Marvel app to start going to the ComiXology app, it expanded their idea of what comics were. All of a sudden, they're being introduced to Image, they're being introduced to IDW, to Dynamite, to all these other publishers, and so then they started buying more stuff, and they found new things, and so it was, I think, the best move for us because we didn't create a competitor, we created a partner.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Interesting.
At the risk of putting a scratch in the record, I wanted to rewind a bit again to the Marvel days and sort of the transition from your Marvel days to your ComiXology days. The first being because we interviewed Jimmy Palmiotti and he brought this up, and I'm curious if you remember it this way. He thought that he and Joe had the first dot comic, or maybe the first original dot comic, with some sort of Daredevil tale. Is that your memory, or do you even remember what the first original dot comic, not breaking up or reformatting one that had already existed?
So the dot comics was repurposing old content.
Okay.
They had, as I mentioned before, they had something before that. I don't remember what it was called. It was I think it was the Shockwave comics. They had a fancy name for it, but they had written and produced content specifically for that. And I'm assuming that at some point it got reprinted because Marvel reprinted everything. But in the beginning of the dot comics days, we basically took this is when the Ultimates came out, right? The Ultimate line. So it started with Ultimate Spider-Man and Ultimate X-Men, and then led to the Ultimates, which was the Avengers. And so I believe the first dot comic was Ultimate Spider-Man #1. And we broke them up into smaller chapters just because we didn't want to have ridiculous file sizes.
Right.
But yes, I more than likely, because it would have been at the time when Marvel Knights, which was formerly, something else.
Yeah, I don't know if it, well, they had come over from their Event Comics.
Yeah, Event. So Event Comics became Marvel Knights.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. And I believe at that time they had done some specific things. And someone showed me a couple of the early attempts, but I believe all of that stuff ended up getting lost because the person who was running it left, and then no one knows where it ended up. I remember seeing a couple things, but I don't remember the name of it. I do know who would probably know, but he's not here.
Okay, so again, sort of just getting the chronology right. When you were getting from Marvel to ComiXology, did you leave Marvel for ComiXology, or did you leave Marvel and then ComiXology sort of came together in that transition to whatever you might have been doing next?
Well, this is the tale of learning how the sausage gets made, right? So I was at Marvel for I think 2 years, and I was kind of getting burned out, on comics and kind of losing interest, and so I decided to leave. And I had started out in advertising and multimedia development, and so I kind of did that for a couple of years. But then in the back of my head, I was thinking, I kind of want to get back into comics. So when I was at Marvel, when I first started at Marvel, everything was done statically. The website was completely static. So 2 people basically spent 1 or 2 weeks updating every single page. And it was basically updating individual HTML pages. And it was very difficult to change things, and we never updated, we never changed any of the shipping dates. And it was just a huge nightmare. So I had come from a background of I had done some database development and some dynamic programming. I'm dating myself, but I started out using something called Perl. And then the big flashy tech at the time, this was 2000 was PHP. And so I thought, this is a really dumb way to do this. You're two people are spending, 80 hours to basically update this website when I could simply build a database, build a CMS, and then we could edit everything in the CMS and then publish everything to the website. And then when you go to the website, everything is being loaded up dynamically. And at the time, not a lot of comic book people or comic book publishers were really leveraging technology in any way. So some of the stuff that I introduced at Marvel was, aside from the dynamic catalog, was that I allowed you to not only go forward in time, but I allowed you to go backwards in time. Like we were keeping the data up. Previously, they would just basically delete everything and replace it with the new stuff. And I was like, no, like let's add some, let's give people a list of like everything that came before it so that, they could use it to help them find stuff in stores. And so after I left Marvel and I was doing more Flash development and some other stuff, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I really want to take this technology and I want to apply it to comics because I love comics. And I think that this would really help. And so at the time, this is back when Apple introduced their dashboard. I don't know if you guys remember the dashboard. It was basically like a series of widgets that you could install on your computer. And I really wanted to build one. And so I thought, this is what I'll do. Diamond Comics releases a weekly list of every comic that comes out that week. And it's tab delimited, which means it's basically a flat database file. So I can take that flat file and I can turn it into something that's browsable. And that's basically how ComiXology got started. It was called ICOS, the iComics on Sale. And it started out as a widget on your Mac where you could basically just load in everything that's coming out that week and you could search it and you could bookmark stuff and you could even print out a shopping list that you could take with yourself to the store to figure out what it is that you want. And that's basically what I built first. And then I met David and then we kind of transitioned into ComiXology.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
It really is. So then somewhere along the way, you guys started publishing your own comics.
We did, yeah. Actually, we did that right from the start.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys remember. I say this a lot. I don't know if you guys remember because it was a long time ago. Back when the first in-app purchasing was launched, Apple had a rule that you weren't allowed to give away a store app for free because they felt that it was a bait and switch. Like you would download the app for free, but you'd have to pay for everything that was in it. So they forced you to sell the app for 99 cents. And as you can imagine, apps that are free do much better than apps that you have to pay for. So to incentivize people to actually buy the app, we commissioned our first comic. It was called Box 13. It was written by David Gallagher and it was drawn by Steve Ellis. And we did it designed specifically to be used with guided view. And the idea was you buy the app, you get to read this comic with this amazing art, and then we would just update it on a frequent basis. And that was the incentive to get people to buy the app. But then Apple finally realized that it was not a good idea to make people pay for an app for that purpose. And so they dropped the rule and then we made it free and the rest is history.
Yeah, I missed there was certain functionality when it first started that I missed, where buying the comics within the app.
Yeah.
Only because it's just, you're in it and made it easier versus going to the web-based part of it, purchasing it, and then coming back. But look, I'm still using it, right? Can you, and this is more for the, the comic book fan in you, Can you recommend any ComiXology originals for people to check out?
Yeah. So the ComiXology Originals program, I mean, I did not realize how much stuff they were producing. You know, they were nice. David was nice enough to send me some of the trades. So like, here's the All-Nighter by Chip Zdarsky and Jason Liu, Paris. I'm gonna mess this up. I apologize. Eleni and Adita Bidikar. I apologize. I'm sure I mispelled those. I mean, mispronounced those. This is great. This is a great book. This is basically the story about a vampire who wants to be a superhero. This is a good one. I would recommend that. Frank Barbary did one. I think it's called Astonishing Times. That's really good. I would highly recommend that. Yeah, you know, you sent me over a stack of books. I'm like, ComiXology produced all of these things? It's crazy. Yeah, I mean,
It's amazing that you're looking for books. I would assume you would be like opening the app and.
Well, they, you know, so this idea is that, you know, at first, oh, this is a good one. Okay, so this is Mark Bernardin.
Mark Bernardin, yeah. Oh, I just
Mark
read
Bernardin.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
I love him.
He was just on Seth Meyers about this.
Yeah,
This is a ComiXology. I would highly recommend this. Yeah, it is kind of funny that the only reason why is because they're sitting right here. Coincidentally, they're coincidentally sitting right here
In arm's reach. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, here's Spike Trotman's book. Yeah, so these all started out as digital firsts. But, you know, the thing that we could, you know, even for all of the people who love to read digital comics, there are still a lot of people who love print. And, you know, the idea about ComiXology is it's not so much about like forcing people to read where you want them to, it's to allow people to read where they want to. And so for the people who want to read digitally, then, you know, we allow you to read digitally. But for the people who, you know, want a physical book, you know, we're giving you that opportunity. I keep saying us, I'm not there anymore. I left ComiXology. But, you know, these are produced or printed by Dark Horse. And, you know, there's some really great content. Joe Glass has a book called The Pride, which I really liked. That was actually my recommendation. So I would highly recommend that. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. And, you know, we had some, so to get to the digitally specific stuff, when we introduced Guided View, we had a couple creators who looked at Guided View and said, I want to use this to tell stories. And so we had, you know, people who wrote their comics in a way, we called them Guided View native comics. You could only read them in Guided View, and it allowed you to, like, you know, we allowed you to do transitions. You could like fade between things. You could have like things pop in. You could zoom around the page. Yeah, I mean, those are specific to digital, to ComiXology. Atomic Robo did one. Oh, you know what? I'm not sure if they're still available. But then Marvel did a whole bunch of them. They were calling them Infinite Comics.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, Riley Brown was one of the pioneers of that format. And he did an amazing Deadpool comic in Guided View Native that really, really took advantage of the medium. I would say if you have access to that, I would highly recommend reading these.
That's great. Yeah, I remember, oh man, I think it was DC had a similar thing. It was the digital series of Smallville, but after the show had ended, it was just like, you know, let's say season 12 or something like that. And it was just, if Clark Kent had continued on and the series had continued, this is what would have happened to him. And it was, you know, they expanded on, you know, his TV mythos and, you know, but then all that went away when they had the crisis.
Does anybody really want to see more of him not in the suit? at that point?
No, he wore this. It actually started with him in the suit. That's how
Oh,
he did.
in that comic?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, in the comic he was wearing it. He even went as
Yeah.
far as he was like Superman, Green Lantern. He had a Green Lantern ring, wearing the suit. I mean, but man,
Wow.
he was the most unhappy Superman ever. I'm sorry. Anyway,
Yes, that was edited by Kwanzaa Johnson slash Sajafo, who was also a Marvel. Who was at Marvel with us at
we're
the
talking
time.
to him next week, I think.
Upcoming
Ah.
guest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you can ask him.
And then
ask him
we'll
about
all
Smallville.
come together for some Marvel, doo-wop at some point. So without getting too far into the weeds, and you probably can't anyway with the business stuff, I'd love to hear about the considerations, your thoughts, your memories about the Amazon transition. When Amazon came to you, how did they come to you? What were you guys thinking in terms of making this big decision? What was that like for you?
Here's lots of money.
Right. I mean, I think that's hanging
Mic
over it.
drop.
Yeah. Financial
So-
considerations, I'm sure, are very high on the list.
So Amazon came sniffing around really early on. Like I think we launched the app in 2009, and I think by 2010 they had started reaching out. So they reached out first, but we couldn't make anything work. So they decided that they were going to do their own thing. They created their own version, and it just was not well received at all. As a matter of fact, I had some friends who worked at DC Comics who got a sneak peek at it, and because Amazon was trying to sell them on it, and they basically were just like, no one's going to use this. This is not well done. And so, Amazon tried to do it on their own. Then finally, someone who, we knew that we'd been speaking to at Amazon, finally, he just said, look, we can't do this. It's time to buy these guys. And so in, 2014, I think it was, or actually probably 2013, because it took a while. They said, all right, we want to make you a serious offer. And so we're like, that's great. Now, Amazon had a lot of the same goals in mind. Like Amazon, I think one of their slogans was every book ever published. And we wanted to get every comic book ever published. There's one example that I like to use, which is All Negro Comics #1. Are you familiar with this?
No.
It's a sad tale. It was basically it was a comic book publisher in the 1940s, I believe. It was all African-American men, or not all men, all African-Americans who ran the business. And it was creators that created comics for people of color. I think it published 2 issues, or they were going to publish the second issue, but then, as they say on Ghost, racism, basically you had other publishers buying up all the paper so that they couldn't buy paper and effectively put them out of business. But this is a comic that I feel more people should know about. And so, and there are a lot of comics out there that more people should know about. There's Destroyer Duck. They created a parody of Howard the Duck. That's just, you can find back issues of it, but it's hard to get a hold of. And so I wanted to be able to go in and find all of these great old comics that people don't know about and make them available digitally. And Amazon kind of had similar goals. So it was kind of nice that they kind of encouraged us to do that. Plus they had a lot of facilities. They had the ability to scan comics. They use it to digitize books, right? Like they would do high res scans of books and then perform OCR on them, so that they were able to easily convert public domain books into digital ready so that you could download them and read them on the Kindle. So they were doing a lot of the stuff that we wanted to do. Plus, they're Amazon. They have like a huge user base. If we could even get, up 1% of their user base to read comics, it would have been a game changer. So they had a lot of the same goals. They had the money, we didn't have to. It gave us the ability to focus on building great technology and a great reading experience and acquiring new content without having to worry about making payroll or without having to worry about presenting to investors. Like, it just freed us up to basically be what we could become.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. I'm taking notes as you mentioned these comics. I'm definitely taking notes. So 2 questions off of what you just mentioned. Has there ever been any content or comics that you just say no to? I mean, and I guess maybe you could probably lump in a lot of the, dare I say, underground comics, because some of that is just gratuitous. But is there maybe some comics that are not necessarily underground that you just would not, include?
So we introduced ComiXology Submit, which was, if you're familiar with Amazon, it would basically be our version of KDP, right? It was a self-publishing platform that would allow small independent creators and small publishers to easily get their content onto ComiXology. When we first started out, like, we constantly got people asking us, like, how do I get my content onto ComiXology? And in the beginning, like, we had to chase the whales. Like, we had to go after DC and Dark Horse and Image and Marvel. Like, those are the people that we had to focus on. So, it took us a while. But then when I originally started out as the CTO, but then I transitioned into basically leading this program, which we called ComiXology Submit. And the idea was to allow anyone who wanted to submit. And, yes, you get a lot of people submitting through Submit, things that, you can't, we didn't want, or we didn't feel comfortable with, or we didn't feel that was up to the quality that our customers have become used to. And the big thing about, comics and ComiXology and Submit is that you're not just competing with the guy next to you and Artist Alley. You're competing against Marvel and DC. So we had a submission process, and we would review all of the books, and some we would reject for fixable reasons, and then they would be able to resubmit. One of the reasons that we would reject a book was because they would use Comic Sans to letter their books. And I hate Comic Sans
across the board.
Exactly.
I mean, Times New Roman.
Just universally,
way, right?
like, not acceptable. That and Helvetica, you just can't.
Yeah. Papyrus. We had.
Whoa.
Oh yeah.
We actually had someone.
Even after Avatar.
Even after Avatar, yeah. But I mean, we had this guy. He gave us a book. It was gorgeous. I mean, it was absolutely gorgeous. He's now working. He's a show designer for the Halo TV show, right? Like, he does, graphic, like, he does the model, or not the models, but he does like the paintings and stuff that the 3D artists use to create. Wow. And he had created this. I mean, it was a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous comic, and he originally lettered it in Comic Sans. And I just wrote to him. I said, "Look, your book is amazing, but you gotta reletter it. You gotta get a good font." And we would point them, Blambot and Comic Craft both have free fonts, and we would point to them and say, "Look, go get a free font, because it's going to make it, like, a bad font is going to degrade your work, right? Like, bad lettering is you could have like Brian Hitch do your comic, but if you letter it in Comic Sans, it's going to look horrible." And so we were strict. Like, we would push back on people because we knew that they weren't just competing with the other Submit people. They were actually competing with, like, Marvel and DC. So we wanted to give them as much of a leg up as possible. But to get back to your original question, yeah, like, when you open up a platform like that, you get a lot of pornography, and, you had to draw a line there. And then, we got things that it's amazing. There's a huge serial killer line of comics. We got a lot of comics about, sadistic people killing people. And, some of it's just like, no, we just can't accept this.
Yeah, I was actually surprised when I saw the Dahmer comic on ComiXology. I was like, huh, how about that? Was it My Friend Jeffrey Dahmer or something like that?
Yes, My Friend Dahmer, which became a movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's Derf Backendorf, right? Like, he's a celebrated cartoonist. Like, he just did a book on Kent State. That's won some awards. And he did it. I have a picture that he drew me of Joey Ramone, which is probably in there somewhere. But I mean, Derf is a celebrated cartoonist. So yeah, Derf knew Jeffrey Dahmer as,
I didn't know that.
They grew up together. And so the book
Hence
was
the name. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So it was basically an autobiographical story about him, growing up with this kid. And then it became a movie.
There's a definitive difference between that and I'm sure some of the blood-soaked, gratuitous serial killer material that you received, unfortunately.
So I have to ask, as a comic book fan, and look, if this is something you can't answer, totally fine. But I would love to know your opinion on the current version of ComiXology.
Well, I worked on the current version of ComiXology. My last role at ComiXology was as the product manager for the comic features on the Kindle app. So I worked on improving the reading experience. So if you compare the reading experience in the Kindle app before the merger, or before the merger, it's like night and day. Like, we slowly made it better. We added guided view to the Kindle app. We added 2-page view, which you didn't have before. We added vertical scroll to the Kindle app. So slowly but surely, we just kept improving. Now, we had built, ComiXology in a way that didn't make it easily integrated into Amazon. And for a while there, we were separate. But there were a lot of advantages for for ComiXology to finally be integrated into Amazon as a whole. It allowed us to do a lot of things. ComiXology Unlimited, which is the all-you-can-read platform, is currently only available in the United States. Integrating fully into Amazon would then allow ComiXology to expand ComiXology Unlimited to outside of the US. So yes, there are a lot of benefits for basically the migration, as we called it. But it did take a cost, right? Like it's definitely not the same experience that it was. And I have to say that the team did an amazing job with what they were presented with. They were tasked to do this, and they did very well, given the parameters of what they were asked to do. It's not a perfect, I can't look at it and say that this is perfect. But what I can say is that this is just the beginning, right? Like now that they've fully integrated, if you look at it like this, you basically had 2 separate platforms, and every time you would update one, you would have to update the other. Mm-hmm. It's different technologies, and so it's double the work. And a lot of times you're in the maintaining things that and you're doing a lot of maintaining and not really building new things. Well, now that everything is together, they have the opportunity to start building on that. So now they can take advantage of things. I believe lending is one of the things that you can do now. So like if you couldn't do that in ComiXology before. So if you have a book and, Mike, if you want to share a book, you can share it with someone. You can share it with Joe and, and vice versa. So that's a good feature. And then as, the way it works is that they can make ComiXology specific features that don't have to necessarily be part of Kindle. So what you're going to start to see is slowly but surely, they're going to start, adding back things that made ComiXology what it is. And slowly but surely, they're going to win back people's trusts. But I understand, there's a lot of angry people.
I was, I felt hurt, betrayed. No. I was, my only, and I don't want to bash by any means because I love it, but there was such a definitive line between the user experience, like I knew I was in ComiXology versus Amazon. And now if I start to look for a particular comic, which I just did before we started talking, because I was remembering, oh yeah, I thought I purchased this. So I went to look for it and it automatically brought me into Amazon versus ComiXology. And the search is different, like I'm not searching through the same thing. So I was, and from that, in that sense, it was a little, I was confused. But no, I love it, to say the least. I'm a huge fan of ComiXology. So, and I'm not just saying that because I'm talking to you. Mike can tell you.
I think a good analogy would be, have either of you played Assassin's Creed?
Long time ago.
I have not.
Okay.
But I know it.
Yes. So Assassin's Creed was this amazing game. It's probably one of my favorite games. And it was built using, so this would have been PlayStation 3, Xbox. Like it was using, first gen tech to build the game. So they decided to, I think it was for the Xbox One, whatever, not the 360, whatever came after so I think it was like PlayStation 4 and not the Xbox One, but whatever came before that. They were going to introduce, they wanted to update the code. So they basically recreated the game in the new code base so that they could take advantage of all of the next gen consoles could handle. Let's just say it was not well received, which sounds very familiar. A lot of people, including me, I didn't play that game. I tried playing it. I didn't really like it, but they basically said the same thing that I'm saying to you, is that this allowed them to basically build a foundation that they could then build on. And they went on to build other games that people have enjoyed based off of this one thing. So I think that, that's the hard pill to swallow. Like it's a little different for me because the migration period was multiple years. I think it was like we had been working on it for like 4 years, I think, by the time it finally came out. So in the beginning, you're pushing back and you're like, no, we can't. And then, after a while you become resigned, and then it's just like, then you start fighting for the things that you want, like to make sure that the customers are getting the best that they can. And so I was fighting for, making sure that the guided view was perfect, and that, that you were getting high res images and that, when you were downloading something, you had confidence. One of the things that we did in ComiXology was every time we updated the book, you would get prompted saying there's a new version of the book if you want to download it. Amazon didn't have, they have something like that, but you have to find it, right? Like they don't tell you that there's a new version of the book. So pushing and working with the teams and championing these features, because that the customers are going to be expecting to be able to do this. And I think one of the first projects that I worked on was migrating our subscription, not the all-you-can-eat subscription service, but it's basically a digital pre-order system where you you can basically go and you can say, every time a new issue of this series comes out, I want to get it. And so I worked on that, and I took the learnings that we had when we implemented it ourselves and applied that to Amazon, so that not only would the ComiXology fans be able to take advantage of it, but also Kindle fans, so that we could expand it out to to other series. Like, I'm trying to think of a non-controversial series, just for the Perry Mason. My dad loves Perry Mason, right? Like, so every time a new Perry Mason book comes out, you'll be able to automatically have it download to your device, and it would charge you at that time. So that was one of the things that I worked on. And then making sure that the submit creators would be able to leverage KDP in a way. Excuse me. KDP, while not perfect, gives the creators a lot of flexibility. A lot of things that Submit didn't allow you to do, you can now do on KDP. And the tool that you can use, Kindle Create. I worked on the comics features for Kindle Create, and while not perfect, are a million times better than what was before it, which was an app that I won't name because I don't want people to accidentally download it. But Kindle Create, you can download Kindle Create, you can author your comic in guided view, you can upload it to KDP, you can set your own price, you can set your own release date. It gives independent creators and small publishers a huge freedom and a lot of advantages to do things that they couldn't do before.
Great. John, thank you very much for walking us through all that. I know it's on a lot of people's minds, and I know it's probably a little bit uncomfortable for you, given some of the at least immediate feedback. Listen, to end on a lighter note, are you up for a lightning round?
A lightning round?
Yeah, real
sure.
Quick questions, quick answers. Take more than
You
more than
just
5
lick your
minutes.
finger and stick it in a light socket, and it's just,
Yeah, that's the lightning round. So, all right, let's jump through this if you're game.
Sure.
What are your desert island books or storylines? One or two.
Planetary. Love Planetary. I read that digitally. I read that every couple of years. It's such a great book. What else? It's hard to say. I have some really, within arm's reach. I should say that I've been designing a lot of I've been working with a friend of mine who has his own publishing company, and I've been designing some trade paperback and collections. So I have a huge pile of books that I've been using as an example. But this book right here is probably my favorite trade. I actually have 3 copies of this because it sells for pretty cheap on eBay, and every time I see it for $5, I'm like, I have to have that.
Is that Alan Davis?
And I do get, yes, this is Alan Davis and Jamie Delano. This is not the Alan Moore run. The Alan Moore run was before this. This is the second one. I actually got the first version of this. My version my copy ended up getting stolen, but I bought my copy in London at a comic book store across from the museum, the British Museum, when I was 18 years old, I think it was, in my very first time in England. And I found it, and I've loved it ever since. And this is basically what led to Excalibur. So yes, so Planetary and then this Captain Britain trade would probably be the 2 books that I would take with me on a desert island.
Great, good ones, good choices. If you were granted comic creating superpowers, would you rather have to be a a scribe, a writer of the nth degree, or an artist?
So I started out as an artist. I actually have my art degree. I fully intended to be a comic book artist. However, I am lazy and I hate drawing backgrounds, which is kind of how I got into doing tech, right? Because it's a lot easier, and it's I think that having had a background of being a mediocre comic book artist, I would probably have to go with writer.
Interesting. Okay. Who are your favorite writers and artists? Maybe one or two of each.
Alan Davis, obviously, Brian Hitch, Adam Hughes. Who else? I loved Jerry Ordway when I was growing up. I read the All-Star Squadron. I read it quite enthusiastically. Who now? Let's see. Doc Shaner. Love Doc Shaner. His Captain Marvel, amazing stuff. So yeah. And when I was younger, I used to chase artists, right? I would read books specifically for the art, which is how I got into The Authority. And then, because, I was introduced to, I had some old Brian Hitch. I had like some Death Head when he was doing Marvel UK. And then they hired him to do the Ultimates, and Ultimates came out when we were at Marvel. And so I got the comics for free, and I was like, this is amazing. And then they're like, well, if you like this, you should go read The Authority. And then I read The Authority, and I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. So yeah.
You can only read the adventures of one character for the rest of your life. Who is it?
Ooh. Probably Captain America. I like Captain America. Yeah, Chris Samney, Captain America. That was some good stuff with Mark Waid. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, he did. That same team did really good work on Daredevil too.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, last one. Weird one. How much would you pay for Staples from Action Comics #1?
Staples from Action Comics #1? Just the Staples?
Just the Staples, assuming they can be completely verified as being from Action Comics #1.
Certificate of authenticity and everything.
I don't know. That sounds
both
like
Staples.
That sounds like a scam. I don't know. I don't think I would pay very much for that. I'd rather go and buy another copy of this.
If it was being sent to you from a Nigerian prince and all you had to do was send him the taxes.
Right. This question's based on a true story, incidentally. I think we saw somewhere, or someone posted somewhere on eBay, that person was selling Staples in like shards of the cover.
Pieces.
Right.
Like whatever had broken off or something like that.
I think it was going in the hundreds, if not thousands of dollars.
Oh my God.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah, and they legit like graded it and everything. Like I don't know what they would grade, something, like scraps of a piece of paper, but somehow did like carbon dating or some shit. And it was, they legitimized it somewhere. But whatever.
Oh, that's hysterical. I don't know why this popped into my head, but like I said, my dad gave me a bunch of his old books. And I was going through one of them, and he had clipped out an article about like a comic book convention that I guess he had gone to in the late 60s, early 70s. So I don't know why that popped into my head when you're talking about Staples, but.
It was Nicolas Cage who bought the Staples.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
It would be the only one that owned them.
Yeah.
Unique character. Well, John, that brings us to the end.
Oh, this has been so much fun.
Yeah, well, we can always come back We can have roundtables. You're welcome whenever you'd like to come on. If you hear something you want to talk about, we can always do one of our infamous bandit bits, which is just kind of our looser format stuff. So it was a pleasure having you on. It was great to reminisce. It was great to hear more about exactly what happened, really. I mean, I was sort of on the periphery of all this and was sort of watching on with awe as, ComiXology took off. So congratulations on obviously all the success with that. And we look forward to, whatever you're doing next.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. And I just want to say again, thank you, because I love reading my comics the way I do. I mean, don't get me wrong. If I could, I would buy, hard copies and stuff again. But I just love it because I've discovered so many other comics. I've been just falling down a rabbit hole late at night. I'm like, oh, what's this? What's this? And just, like that, the Mark Bernardin comic. I'm a fan of him because I listen to a lot of the Kevin Smith podcast that he's on. So I knew about that and I read it when it came out. So I really enjoy that. And, a whole bunch of other stuff. So, yeah, it's good stuff. So thank you for all the awesomeness.
Not to drag it on, but I mean, that was part of why we built it, right?
Yeah.
Like, so that you could be at a bar or in a social setting and you could be like, hey, have you seen this comic? And you're like, no, I haven't. And it's like, pull it up on the phone. There it is. You pull up your phone, download it, go home and read it.
Yeah.
And it was just making it as easy as possible for people to find the comics that they wanted to read. I mean, that was one of our, leadership principle, if you want to borrow an Amazon term, which was to what did we say? It was a comic for every person on the planet, I think is what we used to say.
And we're back. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Because I love talking to John for a few reasons. One, this is someone who you may not realize it has contributed to changing the culture of comic books. Okay, prior to ComiXology, there weren't a whole lot of applications out there like this. There were a few things here and there in the early stages of the internet, but ComiXology has really cemented internet reading of comics. It's everything is at your disposal, and it's just so easy to use, just a click away. All the long boxes that I used to have behind me, they're now on my iPad. It's amazing. But all seriousness, he was a great person to talk to. Just fascinating, super smart guy. It was a good job to Mike for getting us in contact with him.
Yeah, you two did a wonderful job with this. Like I said before, I certainly learned a lot. I echo your sentiments, Joe. What a smart guy, a game changer in the industry, and to have someone who's actually changed, comics as we know it on. That's huge for us.
Yeah, thanks to John for coming on. Joe, thanks to you for co-hosting. Oren, thank you for listening and learning something about the digital world. I find it a fascinating story. I always, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, I love having the creators on, but it's always interesting to find these little niche places within the comics industry. John is an engineer. I don't think we've had an engineer on before. He's really into the, dials and gadgets and everything, the ones and zeros behind putting these comics onto the internet. So I thought it was a fascinating talk. I hope you enjoyed it. And that will do it for this episode of Dollar Bin Bandits. Please rate, review, and subscribe, and we will see you on the flip side.